Good morning, Simpsonville Baptist. Let's go. Another snow day. Here we go. I'm thankful for you guys that were able to show up, and those that are online, we want to welcome you. If you have your Bible, go ahead and turn it over to Nehemiah chapter 5. Have you ever felt vulnerable? You ever felt weak? Has there ever been a time in your life where someone or a circumstance has made you feel extremely small? Most of us in this room have experienced that in some way or another. You know, as I think about it, a lot of times we've been the one who have received that, but also been the one that dishes that kind of feeling. Sometimes it's a comment that we make or an action that we complete. Sometimes it's to someone who we didn't even mean anything by it, but it just came across as wrong. Maybe it was that comment that we made. You know, oppression is something that happens all around the world. Some places it's worse than others, but all of us have somewhat experienced it. And what I mean by that is a lot of times in our own lives, there's this thing called this imago Dei, as the Bible would call it. The image of God that is within us. God has made us in a certain way. When we experience something that's not right, our soul or just our mind begins to cry out. We begin to long for it to be fixed, for it not to be this way. And so if you've ever been in a place, or maybe even currently, you're in a place of vulnerability, you're in a place of need, how does God feel towards you? Does he abandon you? Does he come to deliver you? What does it look like? How does he feel towards you? And that's what we're going to be looking at even today. Nehemiah is a book. A lot of times when you're reading it, you could be confused in thinking that the book's all about building a wall. But really, it's about a God who is building a people. And the problem is that most of the time, if people are building a wall, they think it's only about defense. But really what God was doing is bringing a distinction between everyone outside the wall and everyone inside the wall. There was a huge problem, though, is that there was no difference between the two. The same way that people were treating one another outside the walls was really the same way that they were treating one another inside the walls. And so what good is it if the people of God, who God has called to set them apart from everyone else based on the way that they live their lives, they love one another, they're supposed to stand out. What happens when they don't stand out and they just blend in with the rest of the world? Well, God begins to intervene. Nehemiah chapter 5, starting in verses 1 through 5. It says, "Now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. For there were those who said, 'With our sons and our daughters, we are many. So let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive.' There were also those who said, 'We're mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses just to get grain because of the famine.' And there were those who said, 'We borrowed money for the king's tax on your fields and on our vineyards. And now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers, our children are as their children, yet we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves. And some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but it is not in our power to help it, for other men have our fields and our vineyards.'" You know, oppression is prolonged, cruel, and unjust treatment of another. We see a couple different signs of unjust treatment, don't we? Well, first, we see that there's an outcry. And this word in Hebrew, not only is it so loud that other people across the city of Jerusalem, not only can they just hear it, but also it reaches to the heavens, to God, who listens and intervenes. It's a loud cry. We hear that there's a couple different problems. According to verse 2, we see that there is somewhat of a concern about their lives. They're thinking that they could potentially lose their life because they don't have enough food to eat. Why? Well, some of these folks were working extremely hard. Nehemiah 4:17, look back at that with me. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 17. It says, those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand, talking about what they're doing on the wall, but also they held a weapon in their other hand just to defend themselves. You can think about the hard labor that all of these individuals have been enduring within the last several weeks. So much so that not only are the men crying, but the women are crying. Their own wives are beginning to cry out, hey, they're not trusting their husband just to get the message across. Now they're joining them, trying to get something to change because they feel like their lives are at stake. Part of it is because there's a famine in town. There's a famine, and it's affecting all the other nations, but also it's affecting the Jews. And so they're having to go with very, very harsh measures. When it's tough times, it calls for desperate measures. Desperate times calls for desperate measures. And what they begin to do is they begin to sell all of these belongings that they have. What are they selling? They're selling their homes, selling their businesses, selling everything that they have earned throughout their whole life. It's kind of like if any of us in the room had just one fishing pole, and that was the way that you were trying to earn a living, trying to keep your family afloat. And all of a sudden you decided things are so difficult that I'm gonna sell this fishing pole just to get a fish. You would think that'd be a foolish move, wouldn't you? It'd be foolish. Because then what else do you have? What are the ways in which you're gonna try to help your family down the line tomorrow or next week or next month? And so, let me go ahead and encourage you to take a next step. If you are sometimes like me, and we sometimes make unwise decisions with our money. Listen, Money-Wise is coming up. It's something in the bulletin. It's a small group that's going to be starting on February 26th on a Wednesday night, led by Mike Dougal. And he's a little bit smarter than most of us in the room in regards to finances. I don't know if you know him, but I think that's going to be an incredible way for us to take a next step in thinking through what John Wesley said. John Wesley said this: you ought to earn all you can, save all you can, and then give all you can. And that's going to be an incredible class that will help us think through how to make our buck go as far as it can go. And also, it not just be about our family taking care of us, but also our neighbor when they're going through a difficult time like what's taking place in this passage. But the cry is not just that the taxes are being collected by King Artaxerxes. You see that also in verse 5 or verse 4. But when you look back at verse 1, who are they really crying out against? It's their brothers. Do you see it? The wives are crying out against their Jewish brothers. Who are these Jewish brothers? Turn back to chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 5, it'll be on the screen right behind me. And next to them, the Tekoites repaired, but their nobles would not stoop down to serve their Lord. They would not stoop down to serve. It was beneath them to go to the wall and begin to build it. Everyone else, they were building the wall, but these guys, they felt like, this is just beneath me. I'm just not good at construction enough. They didn't want to learn. They weren't willing to spend their energy on the wall. And so they took a backseat approach. And because of it, it was affecting everyone. We were talking about that just a couple weeks, that when you don't build the wall, when you don't build the gate in your family, it affects the person to your left and to your right. And now it's happening. And so all of these Jewish brothers are going to these individuals within the city of Jerusalem and collecting interest on them. We'll talk about that here in just a moment. Psalm 55, 12 through 14 is a powerful psalm that talks about the grief of going through church hurt. Maybe some of you have went through it before. It says, "For it is not an enemy who taunts me, then I could bear it. It's not an adversary who deals insolently with me, then I could hide from him. No, it's you, a man, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend. We used to take sweet counsel together within God's house. We walked in the throng." Church hurt is the worst hurt. It just is. And some of you, you've been impacted by it. Some of us have dealt those wounds to others just by not being able to guard our own tongue. We speak words maybe to another individual. We don't know how much our words can really damage. It's just like what James talks about in James chapter 3, that it's like just a spark. And then all of a sudden, from a spark, a whole forest is set ablaze. That's church hurt. What do you do when you have church hurt? You know, a lot of us, we can get angry. We can get hurt. And that's a little bit of what Nehemiah begins to endure. Do you see it in verse 6? Let's go verse 6 through verse 13. He says, I was very angry when I heard their outcry and these words. What do you do? Did he just address it immediately, run up to them? Did he say, meet me in the parking lot, bud? Or I'm coming over to his house. How did he address his hurt? Or these other people who were hurt by their own brothers? I took counsel, in verse 7, with myself. I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. So first, he stepped to the side. He stepped to the side as what James tells us to be slow to anger, quick to listen, and slow to speak, right? You need to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Began to think about what is really going on. What's he really bothered about? So our first point is oppression is exposed. Secondly, we ought to help those who are helpless. We see this in verse 5. But also, we look at oppression not only broke a law, but it also broke a heart. It broke Nehemiah's heart. He wanted to do something about it. Look at Deuteronomy 15, 7 and 8. Should be on the screen. This is according to the law. It not only broke the law, but it went further. It says, if among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. You know, in the United States, we're pretty good at chasing the American dream. And it's almost as though it's a biblical thing for some of us. It's like so much cemented in our mind to make a buck that we'll do whatever it takes, some of us. And it's a good thing to work really, really hard. It's a good thing to be very wise with your money. Man, once again, as John Wesley said it, we should earn all we can. But sometimes there can be this big desire to chase the American dream. And in doing so, it's not that we just don't love our neighbor. It's that we forget him completely. We only focus in on our family. We don't really know what's going on across the street. You know, have you ever heard this statement? Help those who help themselves. You ever heard that? You cannot find that in the Bible. I don't know if you knew that. It's nowhere to be found. Look back at verse 5. Do you see what it says? It's not in our power to help it. It's not in our power. We can't do anything about it. You know, there is responsibility that all of us have as citizens of the United States, as citizens just in life. You know, there's responsibility we have not just by being a citizen there, but also by being created in the image of God, that we ought to work hard, get outside our walls, and earn a living for the sake of others. But let me say this, that there are times in which we are called as the church to help those who can't help themselves. Or also, we are also called to help those who aren't willing to help themselves. We are. Well, whose heart did it really break? Did it really break just Nehemiah's? Man, when you go from the Old Testament all the way across the New, you see that God is watching how his people care for the poor. And if they don't care for the poor, if they neglect their neighbor, what happens? He disperses them among the nations. And so Here, God has set them free. They've come back from Persia. He set them free from Egypt. He set them free from basically Babylon and Assyria and Persia. And they're all coming back. And what do they find? Do they find a community of people that are looking to help one another, or a community that's looking to take advantage of one another? And that's oftentimes what kind of happens in our life. We don't do it actively, we do it passively. We do it passively. And we ought to respond when we see other people at a disadvantage. Disadvantage could come from financial gain, that they could be financially unstable. There could be all sorts of different ways in which they are at some sort of a disadvantage, such as this. When I was a youth pastor, we were having a D-Now weekend, and all of a sudden, I'm trying to plan everything. It's Friday afternoon, and all the students are getting ready to come, and I'm probably behind trying to get everything ready. And there was a mom and a son that walked through our facility. I was like, what's going on? How's it going? And they had come on the wrong weekend for their Thanksgiving meal. A lot of times we would plan a Thanksgiving meal. We would pack boxes, and people would come by and pick it up so that they had something for Thanksgiving. And I remember meeting this student and told him, man, it's not that you came on the wrong weekend, you came on the right weekend, for D-Now. And so he spent the entire weekend with us, and it was amazing. We were able to build a relationship. And as I began to build a relationship, I began to see that he wasn't like all the other students. He didn't have the same thing in front of him at home that all the other students in the youth ministry had. You know why? Because his dad was nowhere in the picture. Didn't know his dad. Didn't know where he was, where he'd come from. Didn't know really from his right to his left, because his mom wasn't extremely wise. She wasn't looking out for her son. There was a lot of horrible advice she was giving to him. And I thought, man, this kid, how's he gonna make it? You know how he's gonna make it? It's not through a good youth pastor, it's through a good church. It's through a good church. You know what happened to that kid? He ended up getting a mentor. Somebody stepped into his life, a deacon, and took him by the hand, man, and walked through the next 3 or 4 years of his life. And when that boy graduated and his mom said, I'm moving, and he didn't want to go with her. You know who he wanted to go with? He wanted to go with the church, with that family. He moved in with that family, lived with them, and they began to teach him what it looked like to have a strong work ethic, what it looks like to care for others, what it looks like to be a great man in the church. And he's still a part of the church today, carrying a good job, and I still keep up with him. We ought to respond with controlled anger. Controlled anger. It's not out of control. And sometimes we can get really passionate about correct things that are correct, that we should be passionate, we should be zealous about it, but sometimes what we end up doing is responding in an ungodly manner. Robert D. Jones, he says this from Uprooting Anger, a professor at a seminary close by. He says, righteous anger remains self-controlled. It keeps its head without cursing, without screaming or flying off the handle. It expresses itself in ways consistent with Christian character. What's righteous anger? Did you know God is angry? Did you know that? The Bible paints the picture as he is angry. Now he's not out of control. He's slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, but he is angry. And it's a good thing for him to be angry, because when you are oppressed or you're going through a very, very difficult time and people are treating you harshly, unfairly, and when there's nations across the world that are starving to death or whatever is going on, God is bothered by it. And the way that he usually counters it is through his people, by them responding with zeal and passion, doing things that other people aren't willing to do. Righteous anger is God-centered, where sinful anger is self-centered. What does that look like? God-centered anger is being angry about the things in which God is angry. It's about things that he knows is right and wrong. It arises from a violation of God's will. People are going against what God's law proclaims. It's not based on personal preferences or selfish desires. What does it look like? It looks like righteous anger is it's controlled and constructive. It builds others up. It leads to godly action rather than destruction. But sinful anger, it looks like throwing a plate. It looks like throwing a temper tantrum. It looks like storming off into another room and slamming the door. It looks like taking your fist and throwing it through the wall. And I know there's people in here that knows what I'm talking about, because I've been there. I've been there. You know what sinful anger tends to lead towards? It leads towards bitterness, resentment, or holding grudges. You know what sinful anger looks like? You have a grudge with somebody at church, so you make sure wherever you see them, you go down a different hallway. That's sinful anger. Not going to the person and talking to them about what's really going on in your life. You know, a good example of righteous anger is when Jesus goes through the temple and he sees that it's not a place for prayer. It's not a place for honoring God. It's a place for filling pockets. And so he flips the tables. He responds in a way that is godly. It's godly anger. Sinful anger looks like Cain killing his own brother. And sometimes we might not take someone's life by our hands, but we take their life through our words and through what we're playing on in our minds. Jones emphasizes that most human anger is sinful because it's rooted in self-interest. What makes you angry? What are you angry about? Maybe some of you in here, you're not angry about anything. That's a problem, because God's upset about something. If you're not angry about something, then maybe you're not thinking like God is thinking, and I'm right there with you. But some of us in here, we are angry, and we ought to take it through the filter of, does this really matter to God? And if it doesn't, we should put it to the side. Oppression should be alleviated through word and deed. Verses 14 through 19. Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. The former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people and took from them from their daily ration 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded it over the people, but I did not do so because of the fear of God. I also persevered in the work on this wall, and we acquired no land, and all my servants were gathered there for the work. Moreover, there were at my table 150 men, Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were around us. Now what was prepared at my expense for each day was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep and birds, and every 10 days all kinds of wine in abundance. Yet for all this I did not demand the food allowance of the governor, because the service was too heavy on this people. Oh, remember for my good, oh my God, all that I have done for this people. You know what Nehemiah did when he saw the situation? He didn't just talk a good game, but he did something about it by being an example. He was an example. You know, Nehemiah could have went to Burger King, could have went to, I don't know, Hardee's, wherever the men that gather and begin to talk about all the world's problems, and they solve them within about 2 hours. Nehemiah didn't do it. No, he got busy. He didn't just start complaining. He said, man, what's up with these people? No, he was an example to the whole city. How was he an example? Well, according to Nehemiah 5, we see that he's not just the cupbearer, but he's also the governor. And by sitting in that seat, he could have demanded that food be brought to him by all the other people. They were already had a tax given to them from King Artaxerxes from Persia, but he also could have collected kind of a local tax on the people to make sure they brought to him what he believed that he deserved. He had a very stressful job, but you know what he did with that stress? He took it out on the wall. He started getting out there and building the wall, and he also began to provide by using all of his funds that he had reserved from all the other years that he had served King Artaxerxes in Persia. He began to use those funds in a way to bless those folks that are right there in need. He had 150 men, which more than likely was around 150 families that he was feeding. And it wasn't just his own people. Did you check it out? It was the nations that were around them. He was so generous to everyone that he wanted to make sure that he was displaying not just his heart, because his heart is going to fade back and forth, but he reflected God's heart, what it looks like to care for one another. So what is this going to look like for us? We should use our position to prop the powerless. Use your position to prop the powerless in your regular, ordinary lives, your job. Sometimes we don't know what people are going through because we're not close enough to them for them to cry out to us and what they need. If you're not hearing the cries of people, more than likely you're not close enough to the conversation. You can't hear. We ought to use whatever position that God has given to us. Whether it's in our workplace, as our family, we ought to prop the powerless. Now there is a balance because yes, we ought to help those who aren't willing to help themselves. It's true. God sometimes calls us to it. But sometimes there's a book written about this, When Helping Hurts. Sometimes you can help people and it actually hurt them. And so God give us wisdom with what that looks like. Help us be engaged within the moment to love and be a voice to the voiceless. You know, we ought to be a church that cares for life all the way from the womb to the tomb. Every bit of life we ought to be concerned about and care for one another. And so here's some different ways that we're going to do it. These are some simple ways. All across the sanctuary, you can see it. We've got different projects, different events. Now, it's not about completing a project because we don't want people to feel like they are one. But what we're going to try to do is engage in what people perhaps may need from us, or maybe they just want from us. We want to engage in conversation with them to see how they're doing. How can we pray for you? Maybe it's by offering coffee or a snack bar for teachers all throughout the week. On March 16th through the 17th. You guys have seen this, right? Serve Week signups. For those that are online, it'll be available to you next week as well. Some people, man, they need beds assembled and delivered to their homes. Some people that are less fortunate, or sometimes it's refugees, or it's low-income families, these folks that we want to be rubbing shoulders with. We want to show appreciation to our firemen that are in our city and really across so many other towns in Shelbyville or Simpsonville or other places. We want to make sure they know that we have their back and we're appreciative of them. It's not just about cleaning trash at the park, you know, picking up trash, or it's not about just walking dogs at the local animal shelter. We want to serve those employees. We want to get to know them. We want to take them out for coffee to get to build a relationship with them. And so all of us, within March 16th through the 22nd, we're gonna do exactly what Nehemiah did. We want to sacrifice. Now, none of us, we probably need any of these things. And some of these events that are along the walls, you might not think, well, how much can this really impact this family? Well, you must ask God that, because he can take just a couple loaves of bread and a couple fish and do something amazing with it. And so that's what we're asking, is that we could serve as many people across Shelbyville, Simpsonville, Finchville, wherever these places are. We want to serve as many people with as many of us as possible. And so when we wrap up our service later on, man, we would love for you to go ahead and sign up for one of these events before you leave. But also, there's some other ways that we can serve. You know, a couple years ago, this church did what the church does. And there was a church in eastern Kentucky where Simpsonville Baptist reached out to them in 2022 during the flood. And they were hit extremely hard. And there was a team that went there to help them. And I got news that church, the waters have once again arose. And they need our help. And we're going to go. I don't know who, but we're going to go and we're going to help them. Could be this week. Because that's what the church does, right? Right, church? That's what we do. Man, when people are in a bind, we step up to the plate. It's not just when it's our basement that's flooded that we respond. No, it's when our brother's basement is flooded, we respond even more. Oh, we want to help one another. And so I'm asking that you would respond. I'm asking that you would respond by coming to the altar right here, that you would pray for those, not just at your seat. Man, may the Spirit of God carry you to your knees, asking the Lord right here. May you respond physically, not just spiritually, but respond by coming to one of these and praying for your brothers and sisters that are impacted by the flood. May we begin to pray for all of those that we're going to be encountering across our town, across our cities. And may we begin to pray that God would work in such a mighty way that when we hand them a cup of coffee in the name of Jesus, that it would mean more than just a cup of coffee. That Jesus would begin to mold them and make them and help them encounter him. You know, one of the reasons why we do this is because, you know, Jesus, when he sees us wrapped up in difficult times, being taken advantage of, he can relate. He can relate to that. In Luke chapter 4, there was a time when Jesus went into the temple. It was in his hometown. Everybody knew him. And he opened up a scroll and he read this: "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll then, and he gave it back to the attendant, and he sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." You know what happened after that point? You would have thought, oh man, this is an amazing moment. Fulfillment right in front of our eyes. You would have thought the whole place would have erupted, thinking, he's finally come. The Messiah is here. You know what they did? They tried to throw him off a cliff. Try to throw him off a cliff. And you know what? They ended up doing it 3 years later. They put him on a cross. You know why? Because his heart was broken. His heart was broken. It wasn't broken for him. It was broken for us. It's broken for us who are inside the walls, and it's broken for those outside the walls. And by golly, I want to be with Jesus, don't you? I want, when Jesus sat down and said, this fulfillment, this prophecy is fulfilled, I want it to be like that today, where we read those scriptures and we say, Spirit of the Lord, anoint me. Anoint us to go and proclaim liberty to the captives. And maybe today, this morning, you are held captive. Some of you, you're not oppressed by anybody else. You know who you're oppressed by? Yourself. It's right here. It's not that you're letting other people live rent-free in your head. It's that you're living rent-free in your head. And you're just bad-mouthing yourself over and over and over again, thinking that you're worthless and pointless. And Jesus says different. No. Worthy. All because of Christ and what he did on the cross for you. He wants to set you free. He doesn't just want to forgive you of sin. He wants to set you free from the power of sin. And so may it be today. May we come, may we respond, because Christ has responded to our own brokenness. Will you stand as I pray? Lord Jesus, we do come.